Mr. Mike Glover, welcome to the Wolf and Iron podcast. Great to have you here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you're one of the guys I wanted to talk to for a while, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit before before we jumped on started recording the call. But you're like the everywhere guy because I see you like as an entrepreneur, you're doing all kinds of stuff. You're working with Black Rifle. You got a lot of stuff going on with Fieldcraft, which you've started, and we'll talk about that. There's just a lot of different things that you have going on. It's like you're hopping from one thing to the next. So just kind of give us a little bit of your background, and then maybe we'll jump into like what life is like for you right now in this stage of your entrepreneurial journey and your life.
Yeah, I am the everywhere guy. I'm that guy now. A part of that stems from, I think, the work ethic that I learned in the military. I spent from the ages of 17 to well into my adult years, a long career in the Army. Basically was raised. I felt like I was raised by the Army, but did a few years in the infantry, the rest of my career in special operations. And as a Green Beret, I had to be like a jack of all trades. And so never really a master of anything, but I was certainly good at a lot of things, and decided at some point that I wanted to contract. I contracted for the CIA for about 3 years, and then stepped away from that about 5-6 years ago to start my company, Fieldcraft Survival. What I do at Fieldcraft is we just focus on preparing people for the worst case, and also kind of to thrive in their best case, live in their best life. And so I bounce around all over the United States, whether it's doing speaking engagements. Like next week, I'll be doing a speaking engagement for some dairy farmers out of California, up in Tahoe.
Yeah.
And then the week after that, I'll be training with Travis Pastrana, racing rally cars. So I'm used to that op tempo. We call it operational tempo, and it's really all I know. But yeah, I'm definitely that guy for sure.
Do you ever kind of like slow down and recharge and kind of like regroup? Do you have that kind of baked into your plan, or are you a guy that's coming up with ideas on the fly? And because I know a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we just get so caught up in the day-to-day stuff, and then it's like, oh man, I haven't, had time to really think about stuff.
Yeah. In special operations, I had a team sergeant once who told me that, when you're infiltrating or exfiltrating off or on a target, on an objective, that's your rest time, that's your downtime. Get used to that operational cycle is what he said. And for me, I don't feel like some guys need vacations. They need like the 5-day vacation. I grew up in the military, and I never had a vacation. One, I was broke because I was in the Army, just like everybody who's in the military. You don't make a lot of money. You certainly don't join for the money. So I'm used to kind of coming and going. Like the other day, I came back from New York. I was on the New York Stock Exchange with Evan, ringing the bell as he took his company public. And I flew back 4.5 hours from New York straight into Utah. And that for me was a time for my brain to shut off, stare at a TV screen. I actually was thinking about entrepreneurship because I was watching a documentary on Mark Wahlberg. But that's good enough for me. If I get back from that and get some sleep, get some time to spend with my family and friends, I'm back in it the next day. So I don't need those breaks, but I need to find more time in the future as we get busier to do stuff like that.
Yeah. So let's jump into a little bit of the stuff that's going on with Fieldcraft. Give us a little bit of a history of when you got started with that. I know that like you said, you're a Green Beret, and you did that. You were in the Army for 20 years, I guess.
Yeah,
about 20 years. And then you got out, and then at some point you started Fieldcraft Survival, but just give us kind of a background on what that business is, and because that'll help our audience to kind of understand more the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, I was in the CIA at the time, and I had moved from active duty to the reserve component. It was a sergeant major in special operations. At the same time, I was a contractor for the CIA. And if you come from that line of work, the op tempo is very high in both those fields. So I was coming back from, a foreign country with the CIA, and then putting on my uniform and then going back overseas as a sergeant major in special operations.
Yeah.
And then I got to a point where it wasn't the op tempo, because I was certainly used to that, deploying a lot overseas. That was part of my job. But I kind of wanted something else for my life. At that point, I didn't have much personally in relationships. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have much. So I decided, like, man, I want to do something at home and start to plant roots.
Yeah.
So I came up with the idea of Fieldcraft Survival in Pakistan, actually, on one of my CIA trips. And when I came up with the idea of survival, it was, hey, what's this genre that I really enjoy that's not shooting guns, right? What is the genre of my experience in special operations in survival schools that I really enjoyed? I went to like every survival school: peacetime detention, lock, defeat, and restraint, SEER C, which is the high risk SEER, high risk operations course, all these high speed schools. And that was my favorite part of training.
Yeah.
So I thought, man, civilians don't have really a place they can go to get trained in this spectrum of preparedness, all of these things: mindset, physical fitness, tactical training, first aid, etc. So that was the original business plan. Now that's obviously evolved into equipment, education, training through Fieldcraft Survival. But selfishly and ultimately, the business plan was, what can I create that made me feel like I was back on the teams?
Yeah.
And then having profound impact, living a purpose. And it was that, I created that around me. And certainly right now, I think I'm 6-7 years in it. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be doing it. So yeah, we've done that. Right.
So, and there's a lot of things that are great about that story. One is that as a veteran and as a guy who felt like the Army or the military, that environment was just like his environment. There's a lot of guys that we have that are veterans. Like, I'm a veteran, but I didn't do much. There are a lot of guys that came out. They did a lot more than me. They sacrificed a lot more than most guys do. And they were looking for, like, what's that? How do I give back? How do I keep sort of that mentality, but do that in the civilian world? And you've found a way to do that. And I think that's really key, because there's a lot of guys that are like, well, I'm made for the military, but I can't do that forever. So how do I give back and stay a part of that community? The other thing that I think is cool is that, we've always had guys that were like, teach you how to start a fire or some kind of wilderness survival skills. Here's how you purify water or something like that. But it was always from this mindset of like, your plane goes down, you're in some kind of Bear Grylls survival scenario. And I don't think, like you said, I don't think there was really the guys who were like, the reason you're surviving right now is because, the shit's hit the fan and everything's gone to hell. And you need to have mindset and physical preparedness and all these other things. And this is why I think what you guys do is so cool, because it's really like you're getting trained by warriors, how to do warrior type stuff, or to have that sort of mindset. And I think it is different than, like, taking the Cub Scouts out or Boy Scouts out and, teach them how to start a fire. So, tell us a little bit about maybe some of the challenges that you guys had, or what that early kind of startup was like. So when you got into, okay, you got the idea, Fieldcraft Survival's launched. Was it something that just exploded on the scene, or were you like, how do we do this? Like, how'd that work out for you?
Yeah, it was hard, man. It was super challenging the first few years. When I started the company, it was just me. At the time, it was just an ex-girlfriend that I had who wasn't really into it. It was just me, essentially. Yeah. So I was doing the marketing, which I had no idea what I was doing. I was doing the packing the boxes and packing out the equipment. And our first product was a survival kit that I made that was based off the equipment that I used during a training cycle in the CIA. I went to this high-speed course where they basically give you a Ziploc bag full of equipment. They say, hey, you're going to survive 72 hours with the stuff that's in this bag.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, that's super interesting, because we live in an environment where it's semi-permissive, where things are good until they're bad. And when they're bad, the idea of having the right minimalist equipment on your person to save your life is important to think about. So I started telling that story, sold the product, did decent, but a lot of hard lessons learned. For the one of the years, in the first few years, I was the program manager. My company got hired as the program of record, and I became the program manager for teaching the King of Malaysia's bodyguards, which was a unique thing, because the King of Malaysia at the time was a friend of mine, and he was converting Navy SEALs and Green Berets, Malaysian Green Berets and Navy SEALs, into his protection service, his protective service. So that was really cool. And that influxed a lot of capital of the likes that I've never seen before. And I thought it was a big deal. And I'm like, oh man, that's a lot of cash. well, we could use this to start and kickstart this business, which we did. Long story short, a lot of ups and downs. I mean, at one point, I tell this story. 3 years ago, 3 years ago, I was living in my building, which is a storage warehouse, sleeping on an air mattress. We didn't even have a shower in that building. So I was using a camp shower for 4 months because the Veteran Affairs destroyed my credit because they wouldn't pay the ambulance bills for VA related injuries that I had to go to the hospital with, which became a class action lawsuit and they're fixing now, but destroyed my credit. Then, so I couldn't get a lease or buy a house. And then at the time, we were so broke, we didn't have any money. So it was advantageous for me to sleep there. So I'd wake up, do the work stuff, go to bed, and did that for a period of time until we were able to scale. The biggest challenge I had was I didn't know the direction of the company.
Yeah.
I mean, guys were like, just focus on technical training. Other guys were like, just focus on one product.
Yeah.
Well, I said survival, this idea of preparedness is all of these things. I can't neglect mindset and just focus on drawing a pistol.
Sure.
And so I scaled all of it at the same time at the detriment to relationships and advice. And eventually everything caught up. And when it did boom. I mean, we went from, at the time, a 250K business to a 500K to a multi-million to now a multi-million dollar company, and exponential growth. Obviously, a lot of societal issues have weighed in our favor in this, where people are looking for this type of stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, it just so happens, man. That's the entrepreneurship story, and that's just how it is.
Well, and I think that's the stuff where a lot of guys would, because you guys are bigger now, people find out about you, now and like the current state of things, but they don't know the story behind all of that and what it takes really to get something started. And even when you got something that people would look at today and go, well, that's a no-brainer. Everybody should be, of course you would do this. This is a great business idea. But they don't understand, like when it's something new and nobody's heard of it, you've got to convince people, you've got to figure out the whole marketing behind it. You've got to figure out the messaging behind it, and you've got to figure out the direction of the business. So for Wolf and Iron's got kind of a similar trajectory. We're a few years behind you guys, but Wolf and Iron began in 2013. It was just a blog, eventually became a podcast. And in 2017, I quit my job, started doing Rustic in Maine full time, and Wolf and Iron as well. But we weren't really able to do Wolf and Iron with like the online community and all the other aspects of it that we wanted to until just this last year. And so it's taken basically since 2013 until 2021 to figure out like, what is the direction? Like, what do I want to do? And when we talk about helping men be better men, just doing something like, just focusing on just fatherhood, no, I can't just do that. Or focusing just on marriage, I can't just do that. I want to focus on the whole thing. Kind of like you guys, there's these multifaceted pieces that really kind of need to go together, rise together, and that it complicates things. It's easier to be probably a really niche business, but it doesn't necessarily always fit with the entrepreneur's vision. And I think you got to be true to that vision. And I think ultimately
100%.
it's got to play out the way that you see it going, even if it takes
Yep.
longer, even if it burns some bridges, which is unfortunate as things grow and change, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah, we certainly had evolutionary woes, and whether it was the losing friends who just didn't understand the business acumen or just didn't want to evolve with the brand. I mean, I'll tell people who are listening to this who want to start businesses or own businesses, just expect that. I mean, it's like bureaucracy in an institution. When you get people together, no matter what, you're going to have people problems, and that's okay. And that's just a part of it.
Yep.
One of the things that we're going through now is like a brand evolution. And I say evolution because it's not a brand change, certainly, but that's rubbing people the wrong way. And like you said just now, it's about vision. I have a vision, and every vision I've had entrepreneurially and personally in this company has come to fruition, which has been successful.
Yeah.
So I trust that instinct of my own to evolve the brand in certain ways. So I'm listening to that voice, and then I'm implementing a plan of execution, and we're going full steam ahead. So I'm not afraid of that. I'm used to taking risk, but it certainly is a journey and a challenge in itself.
Yeah, I mean, we see some of this too with Black Rifle. They go public, and you got a lot of people saying, "Oh, they sold out" or whatever. And
Yeah, it's
it's
so
like, come on,
weird.
like what? Like they just made a gigantic leap, as you know, businesses would want to do. I mean, if you think about where they came from. I mean, I know you've been following them since the early days, and I have as well. But it's just like, you know, you've got people who just don't get it. There's always risk, you know, in any kind of change in the business or any kind of change in the direction. And even when it's successful, you know, when it's a successful leap, a lot of people just can't do it, can't hang on. So that's all right. You got to keep pushing forward. So let's talk about some of the guys. Well, let me back up a little bit. So in 2000, 1999, we had like the Y2K thing, right? Every planes are going to be falling out of the sky. And then, you know, after 2001, there was, future terrorist attacks. And I think sometime in the early 2000s, like EMPs were like the big deal. Like, you know, that nukes are going to go off in the sky and black out everything. And so there's always been kind of like this evolution of like, what do we need to be prepared for? Like, what's coming next? And then with all this COVID lockdown stuff and the craziness that's gone on, and even in the last 4 or 5 years with just riots and various other things, I think there's a lot of confusion about like what am I supposed to be prepared for? Like it'd be easy in some ways if it was like a zombie apocalypse, you know, at this point, because we kind of like, all right, we know what that's supposed to be like. Um, in your opinion, where do people need to start? Like what's the safest thing to start in terms of preparedness? And maybe that's a big category. I don't know. And do you expect anything in particular to happen? Like, are you kind of thinking in the next 5 years this could happen?
Yeah, I that's a good question. It's often asked. Um, the my mindset, the answer for me is it depends, right? It depends on the statistical probability of catastrophe and statistics in your area, right? Your area of operation, we call it in the military, your AO, because a person's problems in Miami Beach, Florida, is certainly different than a person's worst case scenarios in, Missoula, Montana.
Right.
So the start point for me in educating people is to have the conversation, right? It starts with the conversation, not for me to you, but for you to your spouse. Like a lot of people never weigh risk, so they never do a risk assessment of their life.
Hmm.
You have a 16-year-old daughter who's getting her driver's license for the first time. That's the highest risk statistically to her life, is getting on the road and driving, where 40,000 people a year perish in vehicle accidents in the United States. That's a lot of human beings. That's a
Yeah.
lot of innocent life lost. Where what would happen if we just had a conversation like, hey, honey, don't ever drive and text. Why? Because a lot of those deaths, those 40,000 human beings, those Americans who die because they're paying attention to their phone and not the road. And I know it almost sounds like not cool enough, right? That's like,
Oh, you
well,
want it to
that's
be
not what I
something
was
like,
looking for.
yeah, you want to be like, you're going to get sniped from the interstate or some Passover or something like that. Or, like, do I need to
Yeah.
have bulletproof windshields? Like, that's what we want, like as a guy. But the truth
Yes.
is like you said, the likelihood of that happening, not very likely.
Yeah.
Unless you're Jason
It's
Bourne or
yeah.
something.
It's not. I would say the conversation is the start point. Now, migrating into the cooler stuff, what I always encourage people to do is pay attention to their vehicle and the capacity of that vehicle with capability. What I mean is, you have a vehicle and it's like a rucksack. We always say your vehicle is an extension of your rucksack, which just means you're going to spend a lot of life in and around a vehicle. And when you think about that, you could be in your office, it could be in the parking lot, you could be at your home, it could be in your driveway, you could be in it because you're commuting. A lot of the considerations for bugging out or even bugging in has to do with this vehicle that potentially is going to be your lifeline. So at a minimum, you want survival related equipment and first aid related equipment inside of that vehicle. So I mean, like, I have a mobility panel that we sell that goes on the back of your seat that converts into a low vis backpack. You could zip it up, pop the top, pop the bottom, and put it on your back. Because if you're in a circumstance where you're confronted, where you're the casualty, your family's the casualty, or somebody you come across as the casualty, you better have first aid equipment that's readily accessible.
Yeah.
The idea of like, oh man, the first responder is going to be my lifeline because I got the phone and I can dial 911. It's often too late. I often think about those 40,000 people who die. Like, how many of them died because the absence of life-saving equipment and training.
Yeah.
And the survival aspect. I mean, we keep track of this because we do it for a living, but often, especially in the wintertime, a lot of people die from exposure because of hypothermia. How many of those people could have not perished because they had a bivy sack, they had the jacket, they had the ability to start the fire or make a shelter? It's basic skill sets, but it's so simple, but we don't want to pay attention to it because it's not a big part of our life.
Right.
Lastly, what I'll say is preparedness is a lifestyle. So the idea that you have this hobby that is drawing your pistol from concealed, and that's your little thing, and you post about it and you do all the letting the world know about it. That's just one segment, 1/1000th, I'd say, of this overall idea of preparedness. You need to make it a lifestyle. Everything from head to toe that you wear every day, the pistol that you carry, the tourniquet, which is more important to carry than the pistol statistically, the vehicle you drive, the house and home defense plan you have, the fire escape plan and catastrophe plan you have with your family. All of those things matter. So do I think there's going to be a worst case scenario unfold? Look, there's a lot of issues politically that in my history on this planet, for the first time, I've seen translate into things that affect people.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that happen in the White House or in the central government typically don't affect everyday people. But for the first time, I'm seeing some of those things affect people, even in our backyard here in Utah. So is there something that I anticipate happening? No. But with the socioeconomic issues that are taking place, especially around politics, the discourse that's taking place throughout social media, there are going to be, like last year, pockets of resistance, of conflict, where you need to be concerned about taking care of yourself and your family first and foremost, which then will transcend into taking care of your community. All of that said, that's where it starts. Preparedness starts in your own backyard. Don't concern yourself with this Cold War that you think is going to land in your backyard. Concern yourself with a plan, no matter what it is, to take care of your family, to take care of your community. And I think that's a great start point for people to get their head wrapped around something so big.
Yes, that's really well said. And a lot of this stuff is easy too. I mean, like easier to kind of like knock off the list and make sure that, your kid's protected in their car, or they've got they got a survival kit in there. They got what they need in kind of that worst case scenario for them. You've got some basic bug out supplies or bug in supplies, whatever the case is. And a lot of this stuff is easier to do. Like my wife and I, we were just going through updating our life insurance the other day. And we realized we've paid like 25,000, I think, because we started when we were like 25 or something. I think we've paid like $25,000 into this life insurance, which I'm like, man, that'd be great to have that money. But but there's a peace of mind that comes from that, of just knowing, like, if something happens to me, she's taken care of financially. If something happens to her, I'll be taken care of. And but that same thing is true, and even more true about some of the survival stuff. Like, you just get it off your list. Like, make sure that you're taken care of. And like you said, um, about the possibility of something happening these days that would really impact us. My son, who's 22, he asked me the other day, he said, "Dad, is it just because I'm getting older that I'm realizing like how messed up the world is? Like, has it always been this crazy? Like, has it always been like this extreme?" And I was like, "No." I was like, here I am at 43 years old, and this is the craziest I've seen things. I don't remember growing up and having people fighting at gas pumps because they heard on the news that there was a shortage of fuel, that they don't even need gas, but they're fighting over it. The same thing with toilet paper and groceries and everything else. And I think, if, for the guys who are listening to this, if something were to happen, something extreme were to happen in the next, 3 to 5 years, you ought to be able to look back on these last couple of years and say, well, yeah, of course it was leading up to this. Of course, there was enough evidence for me to say I ought to have been prepared, and I ought to have had my house in order to deal with these kinds of things, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. And because, yeah, this society is never, at least here in America, I don't remember things being this intense. I don't remember people burning down, neighborhoods, or small towns and that kind of stuff in protest. I know we've had some things happen, but just not in recent memory. So it's kind of crazy, which is one of the reasons I want to have you on the podcast.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
so like, let's say in the next, kind of beyond that, okay, we've got some of the initial stuff locked and loaded. Oh, actually, one thing I want to ask you about. You guys talking about vehicle preparedness. There was I think you guys might still have it, but I thought it was for sale. And I'm trying to convince myself that I should buy it or that I have a need for it. But you guys had this like, like mini, I don't know if it was a Volkswagen, but it was like a van that you guys had outfitted, and it looked so badass. And there was maybe last year or something, I think you guys were, had it for sale at a reasonable price. And I was like, I need this, but I don't need this, but I want this. But then I think I've seen it or something like it in some of your other videos. So I don't know if that's still around.
It's still around. Yeah. I took it off the market and just put it in the warehouse. We use it for content in the backdrop, but it's still for sale. I'll hook you up. I'll give you a discount on it.
Okay. All right. All right. So, well, the other thing I was going to say was I found that super interesting. Just you guys going through the loadout of that vehicle and that build out. And I was like, this is a whole nother thing that you guys could do. Just throwing that out there, but it'd be a lot of fun for guys to watch and to give them some ideas about, that kind of stuff. It'd be cool to see one of those like parked in like every American's driveway, just like
I
we're
know.
ready.
I like the bug out vehicle, man. I love it because I love the overland space because it's such a positive space. But I think also people, when they take, like, you don't have to have $100,000 Raptor to have a bug out rig. All you need is the understanding of like what things you could do to make that a benefit in the worst case scenario. Like, do you have ground clearance? Do you have all-terrain tires? Do you have the right equipment in survival and first aid in the vehicle? Do you have extended fuel capability? All those things matter. And yeah, we do a lot of content centered around vehicles, and it's one of my favorite things to do for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very cool. Very cool. So let's say kind of back into preparedness. Let's say a guy, he's got those things squared away, the kind of the initial stuff that he might be able to knock out in the first, like month or so of just kind of getting into this. I know you guys are doing some kind of like in-person training and some other things that are kind of starting up for Fieldcraft. Where would he go, or what would he do to get involved in? So it's more of that. Okay, we've got our survival stuff. We got some food prep. We've got some basic survival stuff going. What's kind of like that next level, like level 2 or level 3 type of preparedness stuff that he would be getting involved in?
Yeah, I always tell people we offer free content all over the map for that very reason. We want people to kind of bridge the gap between like, hey, are these a paranoid group of preppers, and kind of take that journey and go, oh, this is for me. This is normal stuff. So we have YouTube and the Fieldcraft Survival channel. We have the podcast, the Fieldcraft Survival podcast, and the next journey after they look at, hey, these are potential pieces of equipment, this is some education, is the training journey. One of the things that we do very well throughout the United States is train and bring people together via the training.
Yeah.
My big driving factor culturally is I don't want to do this one-way dissemination of information to a consumer or a client. I want people to show up. I want them to understand, like, hey, we're Americans, we're real people. We just have experts that are scattered through the United States who are hosting these classes, bringing these people together. And you could build relationships with people in your backyard who have these like-minded values.
Yeah.
And so, the first 90 days of the year, we dropped 160 training courses. And the idea is, with the vertical rung of training, like a ladder, you could do all of the specific elements of training in first aid, in tactical, and vehicle in your backyard. So I would start there because that's the progressive path of not only getting the initial training, but sustaining your skill sets, because they are perishable. If you go to a gunfighter pistol course with Fieldcraft Survival, well, you should train across the board with all the other guys that have training companies, and then come back to us once a year because you want to get refreshed. So I think training is the next progressive and natural step in that. And then, what I tell people is, if you're willing to invest in Starbucks, I mean, you should be investing in Black Rebel coffee, but if you got a Starbucks in your backyard,
yeah,
and you hit them up every morning, well, that's a $5 cup of coffee every single day.
Yeah.
And people don't pay attention to that, but they won't take that same money and pull it and go, man, I'm spending thousands of dollars in coffee. Maybe I should spend hundreds of dollars in training for me and my family.
Exactly.
So it's an investment, but I think it's something that's worthwhile, and it's going to bring a lot of purpose to people's lives.
Yeah, and here's what I found is that I think this is for the guys who are like, I don't know if I have the money, I don't know if the wife's going to approve, whatever the budget, that kind of stuff. I found that this is actually a pretty easy sell, at least in my household, because my wife likes the idea of being prepared. She's like, oh man, like, yeah, let's both go do this. Let's go figure these things out. Like we're dedicating a certain amount of our money every month. We just buy ready-made food, that we just basically stick away and just, set back. So it's good for the next 10, 20 years, whatever. It's just one thing that we're doing, just like, some of this other stuff. And I find that, you know, if you can, just like life insurance or anything else, if you can just convince, yourself and other people of the importance of this, like, let's be ready. But you said something that I thought was really interesting about the in-person training that I hadn't thought of, but it's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the crap hitting the fan. And that is, having some knowledge of who around me is ready and would be in support of, a particular direction of things, and that, I think that's where, if you think about, like, if things got bad tomorrow, this for the guys listening to this, and, EMP happens, whatever, who knows, something happens and you're stuck in your neighborhood, do you know people in your neighborhood, not that like are friendly people, because you can't count on friendly people, but that are ready, like that are prepared, that know what to do, or have had some experience with that. And just think about how important like that network would be, to have people like that's huge right there. I mean, that to me, that like that's the selling point of doing in-person stuff, is to have those connections, because man, I'll tell you what, if it does go down, that's going to be key. That's going to be
Yeah.
absolutely key.
Yeah. I'm glad you honed in on that. So about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I started a group called American Contingency. And American Contingency, which is it's a .com, it's a community-based organization where it's based off that idea. It stemmed from what I saw in Seattle and Portland and Baltimore and all these major metropolitan areas, which, by the way, have the highest statistics of crime literally in history
Yeah.
now. That not only was law enforcement haphazardly enforcing laws that were being broken and violated, but those riots were migrating into areas, including neighborhoods, where there was no response. So it wasn't like you're your own first response and you're going to wait on the next level. There's nobody coming because politicians, policymakers were telling law enforcement through the chiefs or through the sheriffs, you're not going to respond to those calls. And that scared me as someone who's seen what that looks like overseas. And that to me felt like the first time in my life understanding counterinsurgency and domestic terrorism and counterterrorism, that we were allowing people, because of an ideology, because of politically correctness, to burn down and potentially murder human beings. And now the statistics demonstrate that at least 24 plus people have been murdered because of those associated and directly correlated to those riots. But we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
And when I started this group, we were immediately looked at as a militant organization. There was an article that was published by USA Today that called me a domestic terrorist, that literally called me a domestic terrorist, with somebody who's been fighting terrorism for his entire adult life.
Yeah.
And not only did I take offense to that, but I doubled down. I got lawyers. We went to war with the media. We wound up winning because they took all the stuff down and then did research. CNN even they tried to do a Proud Boys-esque story, because they did Proud Boys first. And they tried to look at us and go, well, let's talk about this because it seems like you're militant. And then after about an hour of conversation, they were like, yeah, we got no story here. So let's move on. So now here we are. We have 50,000 plus members. We have hundreds of groups all over the country based off of that exact idea. What are you going to do when shit hits the fan in your backyard? Because if the lone wolf ideology is what you aspire or romanticize is going to work, then you're not a steward of history.
Yeah.
You will fail. You'll get ran over because it will become a natural catastrophe. For example, will very rapidly turn into a man-made catastrophe. So who are your neighbors? Who in your community are assets and who are liabilities? who in your friend network can you rely on to come together? Because you can't do it all. I'm the ex-Green Beret. I'm the special operations guy. So I'm the security guy. I'm the tactical guy. I'm the first aid guy. Well, you have other resources that are going to be the cannon girls or guys. You're going to have other people that have specific expertise that when collaborated are going to be able to allow you to sustain and survive over the long haul. I mean, I've realized in bringing people together, which doesn't often happen in society, that for the first time, you don't know your neighbor. When I grew up, I knew everybody on my street.
Yeah.
And my dad knew everybody on our street. Now you scowl at your neighbor. You live in an apartment complex where you have hundreds, if maybe even thousands of people who live above and below you, and you have no idea who they are. Well, if they're not your friend, they're going to be your enemy, because when shit hits the fan, they're going to be trying to all these scarce resources that aren't readily available, they're going to try to get. That's why protests turn into riots, because that's the emotionally charged aspect of desperation that's going to lend itself into something violent. So yes, know thy neighbor, and then start accumulating your assets, reducing your liabilities, and have a meeting. Find a group on AmericanContingency.com in your backyard and start going to meetings and realizing, hey, these aren't crazy people. These are just people in my neighborhood. Like we used to have community watch groups that depended on each other, which now it's crazy. It's a crazy idea now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now we need to focus on building those relationships, because that's ultimately how we'll survive in the long term.
Man, that's good. I'm glad we brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up. That's really good. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of a transition here. This is a bonus here because I want to hear your story about the Wolf 21 stuff. I know that that's something that's a new product that you've come out with on a whole new website and that kind of stuff related to sleep and all that. So this is going to seem like something different, like a totally different conversation. But I'm like, I didn't want you to get away without talking about this. Tell me a little bit of the backstory on that product and just why that particular thing of all the other things that you're doing, why did you come up with Wolf 21? What's the backstory there?
Yeah, I in a personal journey of desperation wanted to sleep. I got out of the military and had a lot of sleep issues related to, endocrine system imbalance and sleep apnea, which I've been diagnosed with. And when I got out, the Veteran Affairs answer was trazodone and Ambien, which in the combination is like the worst thing you could do.
Yeah.
So not a lot of reliable resources there for something viable, something that's going to work. So my entire life, because how I was raised and the military, I was against everything cannabinoid or cannabis related, because weed is bad, right?
Yeah.
And until I got out of the military and I was on my own, and I wasn't getting sleep, and I was destroying relationships with this combination of Ambien and whiskey, right? Because it's like, oh, this Ambien's not kind of putting me down. It's making me feel like crap. Maybe I'll just take a little bit of whiskey, and then blacking out and doing stupid stuff. I didn't realize until I looked at the case studies that Ambien, for example, actually doesn't help with sleep. It gives you the perception that it does, but when you look at your REM and your deep cycle of sleep, it doesn't put you in a deep cycle. It actually does the complete opposite. So I didn't have a solution. One of my buddies at the time in special operations, who had just retired, was big into cannabis. And he gave me indica, which is the sleep version. And I'm not the best versed on cannabis, because I don't do it. But I tried it, and it put me down for the first time. I felt like in a long time. And I didn't want to have a medical marijuana card. I didn't want to do all that stuff. So I started looking into cannabinoids, and cannabinoids that are hemp derived have no THC. I mean, there are trace amounts of THC because you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
But it's microscopic, right? And I wasn't looking for the high. I was looking for the benefits and CBD and CBN of going to sleep. The first night that I used CBD combo, I woke up and was like, dude, that's the first night of sleep I feel like I had in years. And no after effects. I wasn't high. It just shut down my mind, and I was able to get a full night of sleep. And I woke up and went, who the hell makes this? Contacted the company. talk to, which is on a podcast, on the Mike Force podcast, my personal podcast, talk to the co-founder of the company, who's very well versed in the science, and then figured out all the data behind it and realized, I want to be part of this. It's important to me because it's personally affecting my life. But my peer group, I was handing that stuff out like candy, because I'm like, guys, you aren't sleeping, try this. And they're like, oh my God, it's changed my life. So I worked with that company, and I wanted to make my own line of CBD, CBN, because I wanted it to be about sleep, but also health and wellness. So I started the Wolf 21. It's the wolf21.com, where we have a product called Bed Down, which is based off of, it's a special operations term of talking about bad guys and their bed down location where they sleep. So it's got some special operations archive history cool. embedded. And then we just launched Tactical Response, which is the CBG, because there's over 100 cannabinoid receptors that if you attack these individual elements, they could benefit you in different ways. It's a holistic approach. It's what big pharma doesn't want to promote because it hurts their big corporations. But yeah, man, I'm excited about it because it's definitely in all the testimonials, including my own, helping people.
So it's really cool, man. I that's really interesting. I know a lot of guys that have been on Ambien and they feel like crap, and they're like they look like people who don't sleep well, but they also can't get off the Ambien because they feel like they got to use that to get whatever.
They're addicted to it. Yeah,
they're addicted to it. Whatever kind of sleep they can get, it's messing up their relationships because they're just dragging around during the day. But there's also something to be said about, I mean, we've all experienced that awesome night of sleep that just happens once in a blue moon for whatever reason, and you wake up like, I'm ready to freaking crush it. Let's go, And you're like, I wish I could feel this way every day. I wish I could get, that kind of sleep every night. I don't know what I ate or what I did, but there's something that's that worked. And I'm actually interested in trying this out because I actually sleep pretty well. At least I think I do. But there are nights when I'm like, when I some reason I just get a deeper sleep. But the other thing too is that, your body, when it gets that deep sleep, you're getting more testosterone production, you're getting muscle repair, you're getting all this other kind of stuff that happens when you're really sleeping, hard, that you don't get if you're tossing and turning all night and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of benefits other than just you feel more alert the next day. So I think it's a great product, man. And there are a lot of people that are dealing with sleep issues, just related to just the world we live in and, constant media, constant stimulation, whatever. And it's just difficult sometimes to turn our brains off. And I think a holistic solution, dude, that's great. That's a great idea.
Yeah, we sleep a third of our lives, but we never pay attention to it because we're just like neglecting it. We got guys like Gary Vaynerchuk, who's like telling people if you're sleeping, you're wrong, and you only should get 4 hours of sleep a night because you need to get up and crush it. That's stupid, man. Yeah. I mean, that's the dumbest stuff I've ever heard an entrepreneur say. And I'm like, if you're only getting 4 hours of sleep, you're messing up. It's like Jocko who posts. He's at 4:30 in the morning, get after it. Well, it's because Jocko goes to bed at 8:00 p.m. You know what I mean? Like he's getting
like old man time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So get the sleep, make it a part of your life, and pay attention to those details, man. Because I'll tell you what, you have to strike the balance, and the balance starts with a good night of sleep. And that's not just a pitch or a sell. It's somebody who's experienced, working reverse cycle in combat for 9 combat rotations. Like I know the night. But getting back to a normal civil society, I want to get sleep. I'm selfish now.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good word. All right, man. Well, I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for being on here, and great conversation with you. I can't wait to see what you guys got in store for the next, couple of years as we kind of, see you guys grow with Fieldcraft, and hopefully we'll just see you guys popping up all over the place. I can't wait for you guys to come to North Carolina at some point, and I'd love to jump into a class or something with you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on the podcast. And look forward to this podcast and all the work that you're doing. So yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you.